Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. President Trump putting off his plan to impose additional tariffs on Europe is coming out of his meetings at the World Economic Forum over Greenland. Independent journalist Nick Shirley testifies on Capitol Hill today as the House Judiciary Committee probes fraud in Minnesota. We have updates. The Supreme Court is reviewing President Trump's firing of Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. The case has major implications for executive power and central bank independence. Legendary New York hot dog brand Nathan's Famous is changing hands, and its new owner is a Chinese company. The 7th NTD International Figure Painting Competition is exhibiting the finalists' works in New York City this week. We take a look at the collection and hear what the artists want to share with the world.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Thank you for staying with us. President Trump says he will not impose tariffs on European countries amid his ongoing efforts to acquire Greenland. Trump said he made the decision to hold off after speaking with NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte. The president took to Truth Social, saying that the two had established a framework for a future deal on Greenland. Trump had earlier threatened European nations and the UK with 10% tariffs if they opposed his plan to take control of the Arctic island. The president said additional discussions are underway regarding the Golden Dome, a proposed missile defense system. Trump added that Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and others will be responsible for the negotiations. Today at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, President Trump restated his desire to take control of Greenland, saying the island is critical to national security. The president clarified that he's not planning to forcefully take over Greenland. Take a look.
Because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force. All the United States is asking for is a place called Greenland, where we already had it, as a trustee, but respectfully returned it back to Denmark not long ago after we defeated the Germans, the Japanese, the Italians, and others in World War II. We gave it back to them.
The president previously declined to rule out the use of force to acquire Greenland. Trump explained that the island lies between the U.S., China, and Russia, saying that's why it's crucial to national security. The president also said he does not want the island for its rare earth minerals. He said they lie hundreds of feet below thick ice sheets, suggesting it would be hard to attract them. Trump also touched on developments in Europe, criticizing large-scale immigration.
And perhaps how you two and the places where you come from can do much better by following what we're doing, because certain places in Europe are not even recognizable, frankly, anymore. They're not recognizable.
The president says he loves Europe, but added that the continent isn't heading in the right direction. Trump said illegal immigration and large government spending are among the major problems that have to be resolved. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte said today President Trump is right to worry about Arctic security.
And when it comes to the Arctic, I think President Trump is right. Other leaders in NATO are right. We need to defend the Arctic. We know that these sea lanes are opening up. We know that China and Russia are increasingly active in the Arctic. There are 8 countries bordering on the Arctic. 7 are a member of NATO. That's Finland and Sweden and Norway and Denmark, Iceland, Canada and the US. And there's only 1 country bordering on the Arctic outside NATO, and that's Russia. And I would argue there is a 9th country, which is China, which is increasingly active in the Arctic region. So President Trump and other leaders are right. We have to do more there. We have to protect the Arctic.
Rutte said he would not publicly comment on the dispute between the U.S. and Denmark. The NATO leader said he's working on resolving the issue behind closed doors. The Polish president also said he prefers a diplomatic solution on Greenland. Finland's President Alexander Stubb said that NATO working on Arctic security would offer an off-ramp for tensions between Europe and the U.S. President Trump at Davos also touting the achievements of his first year back in office. Here he is at a reception with business leaders at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland earlier today.
We won in the Supreme Court a very important case, merit. Our country was built on merit, and then all of a sudden we got away from that, and people with A averages and high college boards and everything were not able to get into colleges, and people that had C averages and low college boards were getting in. And, you know, it's not fair, but our country is based on merit. The whole concept and the whole system only works on merit. It doesn't work on anything else. And our military works now on merit.
The president highlighted his administration's achievements in terms of the economy, public safety, and foreign policy. He said this past year may have been the best first year for any president. Trump touted law enforcement operations, removing dangerous criminals, more investments coming into the U.S., and billions of dollars in tariff revenue.
We'll have, Scott, I'd say $600 billion worth of tariff money coming in, and I think we're going to have maybe more than that. By next year, it'll be much more than that. That's not including the countries and companies, because we have countries coming over and building, but we have companies, great companies coming in. Apple is spending $650 billion. I mean, it's so many. One just announced $10 billion.
The World Economic Forum's annual meeting is drawing nearly 850 CEOs and chairs, as well as close to 100 unicorns and technology pioneers. Also at Davos, President Trump said that people will be prosecuted for what they did in the 2020 elections. Take a listen.
The war with Ukraine is an example. We are thousands of miles away, separated by a giant ocean. It's a war that should have never started, and it wouldn't have started if the 2020 U.S. presidential election weren't rigged. It was a rigged election. Everybody now knows that. They found out. People will soon be prosecuted for what they did. It's probably breaking news, but it should be. It was a rigged election. Can't have rigged elections.
In his speech at the World Economic Forum, President Trump discussed his interest in Greenland at length. For analysis on this, we're bringing in Grant Newsroom, retired U.S. Marine Colonel, former U.S. diplomat, and senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy. Good afternoon, Colonel. So to start off, I want you to take a listen to this clip of President Trump commenting on Greenland today.
We never asked for anything, and we never got anything. We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force, where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. Okay? Now everyone's saying, oh, good. That's probably the biggest statement I made, because people thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force.
So the president says he won't use force. Colonel, your reaction to what he said, and what leverage does the U.S. have in acquiring Greenland if the relevant parties do not agree?
Well, we've never had a president like Mr. Trump, and what you see is what you get. He's serious about Greenland. The leverage, well, obviously the economic dependencies that the Americans sort of can wield over the Europeans, but also it really comes down to a question of national defense. And the Europeans have allowed their defenses to lapse to the point they're pretty much useless, or pretty close to that. And by themselves, as Mr. Trump said in his speech, there's no combination of powers in Europe that can defend Greenland. But it's not just Greenland, but it's also the threat from the Russians, from the Chinese, that Europe should recognize. It's not clear that their top leaders do. It seems almost that they've tried to sell out or are selling out to the PRC. But the military support that the Americans give to Europe and the economic sort of relationship with the Europeans, these are considerable. And it's not entirely as if everyone in Europe thinks Mr. Trump is a vulgarian, but look at what the Poles and the Americans are doing to build up their defenses. And that is part of NATO. And it does give you some sense that the Americans are not abandoning NATO, but Mr. Trump is sort of playing tough. And he is serious, I think, when he says that he wants to get Greenland. How this is going to be resolved, I don't think anybody quite knows.
Yeah, he is serious. He just posted on Truth Social that he has formed the framework, actually, of a future deal with respect to Greenland with NATO Secretary Mark Rutte. He just posted this moments ago. He said he won't be imposing 10% tariffs on February 1st. But I still want to ask you, President Trump said defending that territory is not feasible if the United States does not own it. He also pointed that the U.S. had kept Greenland in Allied hands during World War II. So I'm wondering, do you think the U.S. can achieve the same security goals without actually having ownership of Greenland?
Well, I think you can come pretty close to it, actually. I think you can, without taking ownership, you can establish your presence, and you can have the legal arrangements made, say, with Denmark, Europeans, whomever. And if push comes to shove, everybody knows that America is going to defend the place. So it is possible, I think, to have our interests sort of locked in. But as Mr. Trump says, when you own something, you look at it very differently than when you have a lease. Leases can always be backtracked on, gotten out of. But as a practical matter, and if it comes down to the sort of reaching an agreement, the Americans can get themselves ensconced there and, as they make it clear that America is going to defend our interests and defend Greenland. One might say that even if we own the place, you could have an administration that, say, like the current British administration is doing with its territory in the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean, where Diego Garcia, the key American base, is located. You could have a future American administration that says, well, we don't really want Greenland. It's not all that serious. We'll give it to somebody else. We'll give it back to Denmark. It's not unthinkable. So a lot depends on the will of the particular administration in the United States. But ownership versus a lease, Mr. Trump is correct in a certain sense, but is that an absolute requirement to actually have American interests and control of Greenland, that strategic territory? It's perhaps not essential, but I understand what the president thinks.
Can we get your comments on the concerns that's motivating this move? China in 2018 declared itself a near-Arctic state, announcing that it would be an important stakeholder in Arctic affairs. What do you make of the administration's position that if the U.S. doesn't take Greenland, China will?
Oh, if the Americans aren't there, you've got a vacuum. Vacuums get filled, and the Chinese will fill it. They always tell you what they're going to do, and when they declared themselves a near-Arctic state, back then, despite that term not existing in international law or anywhere else, they were making it clear that they were going to get up into the Arctic, and everywhere they go, they intend to dominate it. And that's just the way it works. So if the Americans aren't there, China will get it eventually, or get such a presence that they effectively control the place. And you hear it said, well, they're not up there in great numbers. It's just some surveying ships. Well, they're down there taking a look at the sort of the seabed, and that's for submarine warfare. And this is just for starters. You have to look out 5-10 years if you want to understand how much of a risk China is. If you just say, well, what are they today? Well, maybe not so much, but if you look out 5-10 years, it'll be a much, much bigger problem for you. So when Mr. Trump talks about the Chinese and the Russians, but particularly the Chinese, he knows what he's talking about here.
Okay, so there is a threat, according to you, that China might take Greenland, but why should Americans care, right? Can you talk to us about what is the real-world impact that will actually be felt by Americans if China or Russia took control of Greenland?
Well, you heard President Trump say it. He said it's the location that really matters, and he's a real estate man, so he knows the importance of location. And Greenland's location, right in sort of in a position to dominate the North Atlantic, to dominate a key sea route from the Atlantic over to Asia, but also being in a position to interrupt our future missile defenses. You can't overlook it as a place from which you can actually attack the United States. This was really an excellent position if you're an enemy of the U.S. and you want to be in a position to disadvantage the United States and potentially harm them. If you look at it from a defensive perspective, that of the United States, well, then if you have Greenland, suddenly your missile defenses become more effective, and also you have some capacity as well for offensive operations. It is key terrain if there ever was. Just got overlooked for much too long.
Okay, Colonel, just one final thing. I found this interesting, and I'm curious to hear your comments on. It's not necessarily about Greenland, but Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said that the U.S.'s role at this year's WEF is to express that globalization has failed the West and the U.S. Just finally, do you agree with that statement, and can you explain to us why?
Well, I think anybody in Youngstown, Ohio, or Erie, Pennsylvania would agree with you. Globalization was really foisted on the world by American elites as much as anyone else. And the idea was that if you send your manufacturing overseas, that's good for everybody. Well, it's good for them, but it was not good for these neighborhoods which were ravaged, set themselves up for China's fentanyl assault. This has not been a success, and I think it's been a failure. I think the secretary is correct about that. Some people got very rich off of it, but a country that doesn't make things is not much of a country. And that is something that we've sort of seen, sort of proven over the last 30, 40 years. So it could be, of course, that a subsequent administration says globalization is great. And the sort of the elites on Wall Street and the financial class will probably push that as well. But as long as this administration is around, I think they're right. And I think if you sort of ask that question in the parts of the United States that were gutted by this rush to offshore, they would agree with you. Plus, there is also, beyond economics, there's the idea that's part of globalization. I've seen it at one of the World Economic Forum sort of farm team events in the UAE that I was invited to some years ago. The idea is that control by a supranational organization to include control over America and what Americans do, how they live, is a good thing. And that is part and parcel of globalization. It's not just the economic aspect to it, but there is very much a political and sort of a control mechanism in all of this. And this administration doesn't care for that much and is trying to do something about it. So I hope the secretary is right when he said that.
Well, okay, Colonel, it's always enjoyable to hear your insight. Thank you so much today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Iran is in the spotlight as tensions with the U.S. continue. Tehran yesterday warned President Trump not to take action against the country's leader. NTD's Daniel Monahan reports on that, plus updates on the Gaza Board of Peace.
The comments from Iran come days after President Trump called for an end to Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's nearly 40-year reign. Iran's foreign minister issued a direct threat against the United States, warning that if attacked again, Tehran will respond with, quote, everything we have. President Trump addressed tensions with Iran over its assassination threats against him, speaking on News Nation.
I would absolutely hit them so hard. But I have very firm instructions. Anything happens, they're going to wipe them off the face of this earth.
Meanwhile, U.S. forces are repositioning toward the Middle East, including the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln. China is sure to be watching developments in Iran closely. Beijing has played a major role in sustaining Iran's economy, viewing the country as strategically vital to the Belt and Road Initiative. China committed up to $400 billion in investments under a 25-year cooperation deal, while Iran supplies oil, more than 90% of which is bought by China, despite U.S. sanctions. According to China expert Alexander Lau, this supports Beijing's push for yuan-based energy trade and de-dollarization. The Atlantic Council think tank reports that Iran, Russia, and China now trade sanctioned oil in Chinese currency. But analysts say if Iran shifts toward the West, China could lose key leverage in the Middle East. Over to Gaza, President Trump discussed the Board of Peace, which he chairs as part of the U.S. brokered ceasefire plan between Israel and the Hamas terror group.
We just created the Board of Peace, which I think is going to be amazing.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said today he had agreed to join the Board of Peace. His office earlier criticized the makeup of the board's committee. Trump has sent invitations to dozens of countries to join. United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have confirmed their participation. Russia, China, and Belarus have also been invited. French President Emmanuel Macron opted not to join the Board of Peace over concerns it could undermine the United Nations. President Trump says the Board of Peace could actually end up replacing the United Nations.
I wish the United Nations could do more. I wish we didn't need a Board of Peace, but the United Nations, and you know, with all the wars I settled, the United Nations never helped me on one war.
When a reporter asked the president whether the Board of Peace could replace the UN, he replied, it might. Despite criticizing the UN, Trump didn't call for the dissolution of the international body. The president says the potential of the organization is, quote, so great. The Board of Peace will also include an international stabilization force led by U.S. Army Major General Jasper Jeffers. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
The legendary New York hot dog brand Nathan's Famous is changing hands, and its new owner is a Chinese company. Find out more about that after this break.
A performance that truly matters for each and every one of us. This is what you've been waiting for. See it at least once in your lifetime. Shen Yun. Get tickets now at shenyun.com.
Kids love it. Parents trust it.
Obviously.
Explore GJW Plus Kids Series and Ganjiang Campus courses led by expert educators.
This is spectacular.
Children will learn values like respect, responsibility, and knowledge in language, science, and more.
Wow.
All while having fun.
Perfect.
Subscribe today at GJW Plus Kids, where learning meets fun.
The Supreme Court seems inclined to keep Lisa Cook on the Federal Reserve Board. That's while her case against the president's removal order proceeds. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson asked today what harm it would be caused to allow Cook to remain in her position.
I'm not sure that we have evidence here that Ms. Cook is an immediate threat to the public, that she's been in this position for a long time. The kinds of things that you're pointing to, as Justice Sotomayor indicates, are not related to conduct while in office. So it would seem to me that on the stay factors, you would have to say more about the harm of leaving her there for the next however many months while this case is being litigated.
Many of the questions posed involved whether or not President Trump gave Cook proper notice and an opportunity to be heard before he fired her. Cook's attorney also faced a number of questions involving what a proper hearing would look like. Despite the number of questions posed to both sides, it appeared the justices would decide to allow Cook to remain in office, at least temporarily, until her case against Trump is ultimately decided. Joining us now to discuss is Bobby Ann Cox, civil rights attorney and fellow at the Brownstone Institute. She's also a legal analyst. So Bobby Ann, thank you for joining us today. During about 2 hours of arguments in the case, the justices indicated they were likely to keep the judge's decision, barring Trump from immediately firing Cook. What were the main arguments they gave? Can you just talk to us about that briefly?
Sure. So basically, the attorney that's representing President Trump in the firing of Lisa Cook is saying that, a court does not have jurisdiction to intervene in this type of a matter. He's arguing that the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 specifically says that a president can remove a Federal Reserve governor for cause. And President Trump has said that the cause, the issue at hand, is that supposedly, allegedly, this woman, Cook, has lied on a mortgage application and in order to get a better interest rate on that mortgage. And so he, being the president, has determined that is sufficient cause to remove her. Whereas on the other side, Cook's attorneys are arguing that, first of all, she did not have any notice. There was no due notice. There was no right or opportunity to be heard before she was fired. So they're arguing that her constitutional rights have been violated in that instance. And they are also arguing that this is something that a court can adjudicate, and that this is not an unfettered presidential power that gives the president of the United States, any reason whatsoever to remove somebody from the Federal Reserve Board. So we have two completely opposing arguments going on here in this case. So we're going to have to see how the justices come down on a final decision. But this is not actually the ultimate decision about whether or not she is going to be removed permanently as a governor of the Federal Reserve. This is just an argument over whether or not while she's fighting in court to keep her job, whether or not she's allowed to remain on the Federal Reserve Board for the interim of that fight. So we're going to have to see how the justices come down with this decision.
Okay, so I just want to follow up on your for cause part of your response earlier. So the alleged mortgage fraud occurred before her Senate confirmation. So, I mean, in your view, does that weaken it, using it now as grounds for removal?
Well, it doesn't really weaken it because, during oral arguments today, one of the conservative justices, did pose a question. Let's say that one of the Federal Reserve governors committed a crime before they were appointed to the Federal Reserve, something that was, truly heinous, like applauding and showing admiration for Hitler, he said, as an example, or for the KKK, he said, as an example. So, he posed this egregious example of, if a Federal Reserve governor had done something like that prior to being appointed, and then all of a sudden it was revealed once they were in the position, wouldn't we be in a position to remove them from the Federal Reserve after finding out this information? So I don't think the fact that this alleged mortgage fraud occurred before her appointment to the Federal Reserve really should play into the decision here. I think it's more a question of, does the court even have the power to intervene in this situation, or is this truly a presidential power that is bestowed upon the president by the federal statute that was first passed in 1913 when the Federal Reserve Bank was created?
How much weight did the Supreme Court put on whether Cook's firing would impact the economy, and what harm would there be of letting her be on the board until this case plays out?
Right. So that was also part of the arguments today that the court heard. What is the negative impact of either removing Cook right away while her legal battle is going through the courts, or leaving her in this position while her legal battle is winding its way through the courts. And both sides had, very opposite answers to the question. Trump's attorneys arguing that there will be harm. It'll be immediate harm, and it could be irreparable harm to the public opinion and the public trust in this Federal Reserve Bank if this woman, Cook, is allowed to stay on the Federal Reserve while her legal battle is going on, because they argue, because her alleged infraction is with regards to the exact thing that the Federal Reserve it oversees, right? So the Federal Reserve sets interest rates across the country. And, this woman is being accused of having done a fraud, mortgage fraud, in order to earn a better, more favorable interest rate on a loan that she took out. So they're arguing that this is very germane to the situation and it rises to the level of for cause. But then on the other side, Cook's attorneys arguing, it's basically a political ploy, and that this is just a witch hunt, so to speak, and that really his client, Lisa Cook, has not done anything that is inappropriate. He said, if she put this property down as her primary residence instead of a vacation home, it wasn't because she was trying to defraud the system and get a better rate. It was just simply a mistake that was made in the paperwork. So, he's arguing that she should remain in her position and she has right to a trial, and that the court should ultimately be able to decide whether or not she can stay in her position until her legal battle can play its way through the courts. So very opposing views and very opposing arguments going on today.
Okay, Bobby Ann, just one more thing, and this is another point of conversation I'd like to hear your thoughts on. Does the firing of Cook infringe on the independence of the Federal Reserve?
I don't think that it does directly because, if we look at the language of the statute that's in question here, it's the Federal Reserve Act from 1913. If you look at the language, it is very clear. It does give the president power to remove one of the governors from the Federal Reserve for cause. And it doesn't define that, right? So the statute itself doesn't say what that means, and it doesn't say how you remove someone. It simply gives the president the power to remove one of the governors for cause. And it doesn't say you have to give notice. It doesn't say you have to give the right to a trial and a hearing. It doesn't say any of this. So the fact that when Congress created this law in 1913 and Congress didn't specify what that means and how that looks on how the president would have to remove somebody from the position, the fact that they left it open and broad, when you read the language of the statute, it really does infer that Congress's intent when they wrote this statute was that the president would have this power and that it wouldn't be challenged because there's no procedure set out in the statute saying how he has to remove one of the governors for due cause. So I think that it's not going to be a negative impact upon the Federal Reserve in its autonomy. I think we just need to look at the statute and really read into what the intent Congress had at the time of passing.
Well, okay, Bobby Ann, very balanced analysis. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yes, thank you.
Attorney General Pam Bondi announced yesterday that Lindsay Halligan is leaving her post as a top federal prosecutor in Virginia. Bondi described the Trump allies' departure as a significant loss to the Department of Justice. The announcement came the same day a federal judge barred Halligan from representing herself as the U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia. The court decided her lack of prosecutorial experience and noted she could face disciplinary action if she continued to claim the role. Halligan said she faced baseless accusations and disputed the court's actions. She argued the position remained unfilled. Her tenure included high-profile cases against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James, which were dismissed by federal judges. Controversy at Rutgers University over alleged racism. Students have traded barbs online with Professor Brittany Cooper over past race-based statements. NTD's Daniel Monahan spoke with a pair of Rutgers students who are asking for accountability.
Brittany Cooper is a professor of women's and gender studies and Africana studies. Comments she made during an interview about critical race theory with the Root Institute continued to make waves a few years after being shared by the New York Post and others.
I think that white people are committed to being villains in the aggregate.
Cooper discusses colonialism.
White human beings thought there's a world here and we own it. Prior to them, Black and brown people have been sailing across oceans, interacting with each other for centuries without total subjugation, domination, and colonialism.
The professor was asked in the interview, what is the solution to a more equitable sharing of resources, since the nature of white people compels them to hoard power and goods?
The thing I want to say to you is we got to take these out. But I know, we can't say that, right? We can't say, I don't believe in a project of violence. I truly don't.
Rutgers University student Ava Kwan reacts to Cooper's comments about race in the video.
It's not professional to have a professor who so blatantly advocates for violence against white people. To so confidently say we need to take white people out is outrageous. It's a very vile statement to make, especially as a professor working with students of all different races and backgrounds. It's very disappointing to see.
Kwan says they still haven't seen a statement from Rutgers.
I'm not holding out much hope, but I do hope that we do see action from the federal government. I know that Rutgers is requesting up to $530 million in federal funding this year. And I think that now that we know that we have professors employed who are essentially advocating for white genocide.
Student Megan Doyle says it's very disappointing that Rutgers would employ someone with what she sees as such bias. Doyle recently had a heated discussion on social media with Cooper.
this professor refused to apologize for her actions in her statement on Instagram. And I decided to call her out on it, like many others would do, especially when you're a Rutgers student. You expect your professors to maintain a professional stance and not a racist one. So when you have a professor like that, you have to really question whether this professor is capable of teaching without a bias towards white students.
Cooper responded to her clips again going viral online this month. She said she gave an interview in 2021 about the anger Black people feel at the persistence of racism. She said her remarks were misconstrued as an advocacy of violence. She said in reality she concluded in her interview that violence is not an answer. Rutgers issued a statement of support for Cooper back when the video first aired, saying she has been subjected to racist attacks for her public scholarship. The university expressed its, quote, unequivocal solidarity with Dr. Cooper and affirmed their support of what they called her academic freedom. Ava Kwan doesn't believe what she calls advocating for violence counts as free speech.
I think that when you're making a comment, stating that we need to take a certain group of people out, you are inciting violence, and it undermines the whole concept of free speech in itself. No one is going to feel safe enough to speak up in a classroom, let's say, if they think that their professor is going to do something or believes that they need to be taken out. That doesn't allow free speech. Those kind of comments don't allow free speech. It actually shuts down free speech.
Doyle feels that racism, if directed toward certain groups, gets a free pass in institutions of higher learning.
I fundamentally believe that white racism is generally dismissed, especially in higher academics like this one.
The two students say they have received backlash for speaking out against Cooper's comments, and also previously about a professor, Mark Bray, who wrote a best-selling book, Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook. The students feel if they don't speak up, who will? Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
President Trump has signed a new executive order focused on home ownership. The order is designed to restrict Wall Street firms from buying up single-family homes. In his order, Trump blames Wall Street investors and the Biden administration for driving up prices and putting homes out of reach for ordinary Americans. Now, federal agencies have been instructed to not approve or facilitate sales of single-family homes to institutional investors. Trump also called on Attorney General Pam Bondi and the Federal Trade Commission to review large acquisitions by such investors for anti-competitive effects. The order reads, the people live in homes, not corporations. The impact the order will have on the housing market remains uncertain as of right now. The latest from Minnesota now, as the federal government and state officials go head-to-head over immigration enforcement. The Justice Department has started issuing subpoenas to top officials as part of its investigation into anti-ICE protests. Here's what we know.
The standoff between the federal government and state officials in Minnesota is escalating. The Department of Justice has now started issuing subpoenas to Minnesota officials as part of its investigation into anti-ICE protests, some of which have turned violent. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey's office told the Epoch Times it has received a subpoena. It came after Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem accused Frey and Governor Tim Walz of encouraging, impeding, and assault against federal law enforcement. In a post on X Tuesday, Frey said when the federal government weaponizes its power to intimidate local leaders for doing their jobs, every American should be concerned. Walz's office did not respond to a request for comment, but in a statement on X, the governor called the ongoing investigation a partisan distraction. Meanwhile, Border Patrol boss Greg Bovino stressed the importance of immigration enforcement in Minnesota to the Trump administration. At a press conference yesterday in Minneapolis, Bovino said what happens in Minneapolis is directly connected to what happens at the border.
Border enforcement and interior enforcement are two parts of the same mission. A secure border without interior enforcement leaves communities vulnerable. And interior enforcement without border control is unsustainable.
Bovino said federal agents had arrested more than 10,000 criminal illegal aliens in Minneapolis since the start of the second Trump administration, and more than 3,000 of the worst offenders in the last 6 weeks alone. Even as tensions between state and federal government escalate, President Trump says he doesn't yet need to invoke the Insurrection Act in Minnesota. Trump's comments come after he earlier said he could employ the powerful tool to aid immigration enforcement officers in the state. The Insurrection Act allows the president to deploy the military when federal law enforcement becomes impossible through regular means. In an interview with News Nation yesterday, Trump said invoking the act would make life a lot easier, but he didn't think it was needed at this point. In that interview, Trump also addressed a controversial protest in which demonstrators stormed a Baptist church in St. Paul, accusing one of the pastors of being an ICE agent. He accused Sunday's protesters of being paid agitators.
And then you have the agitators, anarchists. I watched sort of everything. I see it all. And I see people screaming, shame, shame. This is not people that are like living in Minnesota. These are professional, paid people. They're like actors.
That incident is now under federal investigation. DHS says there are more than 2,500 federal agents currently on the ground in Minnesota. Officials are now saying an additional 1,500 could be on their way in the coming weeks.
Fraud in focus on Capitol Hill. Independent journalist Nick Shirley, a former fraud investigator, and other witnesses testified on the massive fraud scheme in Minnesota. The witnesses say warning signs were in the air long ahead of the federal government crackdown. Officials say about $9 billion in tax dollars were likely stolen. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has the story.
House lawmakers on the Judiciary Committee further exposing the billion-dollar fraud scheme in Minnesota.
These fraudulent actions have robbed taxpayer funds intended to feed children, support individuals with autism, provide housing for low-income and disabled Americans, and deliver health care to Medicaid recipients.
Independent journalist Nick Shirley made an appearance, reflecting on his findings after traveling around to expose the daycare fraud.
Since my reporting, the HHS department froze over $185 million, and to this day, not a single business has been able to prove proof of legitimacy.
It looked like it was a number of facilities like in the same building.
Yes. So in one building, there was, I believe, 3 daycares, and there was no children. And they were all receiving CCAP funding for separate daycares. There was one daycare we went to that one day it was closed by the government, and then that same day it was reopened underneath another name. And they both received CCAP funding.
After federal prosecutors found $9 billion tax dollars were potentially found to have been stolen by fraudsters, the Trump administration froze funding for social service programs. One witness who directly felt the impacts reflected that everyone, including legitimate child care services, suffer due to what she called the state government's lack of action.
I built Holland for 20 years. Families built their lives around the care that we provide. All of that is risk of destruction today, not by fraud, but by clumsy government response that failed to distinguish between criminals and caregivers.
Governor Walz has insisted that his office has spent years cracking down on fraudsters. But one former fraud investigator said he faced pushback from state officials when he tried to look deeper into the warning signs early on.
You tell the truth, they call you racist. Exactly what happened here. So they ignore your recommendations, they call you a racist, but it even got worse than that. If you can imagine, they started investigating you, is that right?
Yes, we were interviewed by an outside firm for a report given to the Office of Legislative Auditor.
The Judiciary hearing comes as a separate committee is investigating alleged Medicaid fraud in Minnesota. On Tuesday, lawmakers requested documents and information from Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and the temporary commissioner of Minnesota's Department of Human Services. In a letter to state officials, lawmakers claim fraud is rampant in the state and that many of Minnesota's Medicaid programs were designed in such a way that made them vulnerable to fraud. The chairman warned that Medicaid funds will be withheld if the state doesn't comply with federal Medicaid requirements. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Protesters take to the streets across America as President Trump's second term enters its second year. Yesterday marked 1 year of a presidency defined, among other things, by intensified operations against illegal immigration. In Washington, D.C., hundreds of demonstrators took to the streets to protest ICE operations. They were led by the Marxist group, the Party for Socialism and Liberation. The demonstration remained peaceful, surrounded by all sides by law enforcement. Aside from the nation's capital, organizers planned coordinated protests across the country. From Bryant Park in New York City to Los Angeles City Hall and Atlanta, hundreds of students at Lakeside High School walked out of class as a part of a nationwide anti-ICE protest. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is streamlining the application process for deep-sea critical mining. Today, the agency announced new regulations for exploration licenses and commercial recovery permits. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the details.
In the race to secure critical minerals, the U.S. government is accelerating its permitting process for deep-sea mining. Today, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced revisions under the Deep Seabed Hard Mineral Resources Act. The new consolidated application process will allow eligible applicants to apply for and obtain exploration and commercial recovery permits simultaneously. NOAA Administrator Neil Jacobs said the changes will enable American companies to access the natural resources more quickly. Jacobs added that the revisions will support the Trump administration's America First agenda and strengthen the U.S. economy. Today's announcement comes as the U.S. competes with adversaries such as China for control of critical minerals, resources that are crucial for computers, medical devices, the defense industry, and more. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
The largest active measles outbreak in the United States continues to grow in South Carolina. Health officials are reporting nearly 90 new cases and about 540 people currently in quarantine. The outbreak has reached college campuses, including Clemson University and Anderson University, along with several primary schools. State officials say the outbreak began last year and has been linked to infections in neighboring states. The CDC reports more than 2,200 measles cases nationwide in 2025, the highest number since 1991. And in the year 2000, the disease was declared eliminated in the U.S., but the Pan American Health Organization could change the U.S. status when it meets again in April. A major winter storm is taking shape. It's expected to be the most extreme winter weather storm so far this season, set to bring the season's coldest air to date. It comes as many communities are already getting lashed by severe winter weather. Take a look at this report.
I wish it would stop. I think we're pushing 20 inches, 21, 22 inches.
Residents in upstate New York digging out after a lake-effect snowstorm dumped more than 20 inches amid brutal winter weather.
We're going to get it for 24 hours straight for sure.
That lake-effect snow causing whiteout conditions. Authorities responding to multiple crashes on Interstate 90 involving roughly 60 vehicles over a 6-mile stretch of highway. Officials said there were multiple jackknife tractor trailers as well as passenger vehicles that were struck. Authorities had to divert traffic and shut down all westbound lanes of the interstate. The brutal winter weather is set to get worse for many, with the most extreme winter storm so far this season forecast to slam the eastern half of the U.S. with damaging ice and heavy snow. The storm, fueled by a blast of Arctic air, is set to hit the Midwest and Plains Thursday into Friday, then spread into the south and east this weekend. Communities in the storm's path are bracing for snow, sleet, and freezing rain, a dangerous wintry mix that could stretch more than 1,000 miles from Oklahoma and northern Texas to North Carolina and Virginia by Saturday night.
Salt shipment is very important. We were starting to get low from all we've had, and there are so many different places that's using salt right now, especially up north. It's getting kind of hard to get.
According to his new book, investigative journalist Peter Schweizer reports that thousands of Chinese nationals are trained every year at U.S. flight schools before returning to China to serve in the regime's military. Joining us now to discuss this is Michael Lucci, founder and CEO of State Armor. Michael, good afternoon. So Schweizer says that there are at least 16 flight schools in the U.S. that do this. What do you think about the situation?
Don, this is insane. We are defining insanity here. We have flight schools that are training the United States Air Force on the front door, and in the back door, they're training China's military. So they're actually training pilots from both sides who might one day see each other in the air in combat, life or death situation. This should be an absolute non-starter. The United States Air Force should come out today and say, if you are training our pilots, you cannot train pilots for the Chinese Communist Party. Anyone training pilots for the Chinese Communist Party should lose all business with the United States Air Force today.
And Michael, here's the kicker. Some of these are taxpayer-funded airports in California and Arizona where these Chinese nationals are trained.
It's really unbelievable. So the American taxpayer is funding the airports, funding the training centers. China's military is taking advantage of it. And you just mentioned Phoenix, Arizona, where it's called AeroGuard is the flight training program there. This is right next to Luke Air Force Base. That's where we train more F-35 fighter pilots than anywhere else in the world. So Luke Air Force Base is training our most sophisticated pilots on one side of Phoenix. On the other side of Phoenix, you have this company training Chinese Communist Party pilots that will go into the Air Force, into their commercial airlines, but that's going to be one and the same. We need to stop allowing them to exploit our openness, stop allowing our openness and our strength to be sapped by the Chinese Communist Party to turn into their advantage.
Okay, Michael, can you paint us a real-world picture of the actual on-the-ground impacts? What are the national security implications of training thousands of future Chinese pilots?
There are multiple levels. I actually spoke with a pilot who trains at one of these installations earlier today, the one in Phoenix. He's a private pilot. He said that the air traffic control there has a hard time dealing with all the people who don't speak good English. They speak broken English. So that's one level of security risk. But then the most obvious is these pilots can then fly over near Luke Air Force Base, surveil assets that are extremely important there. We've caught them doing this in multiple places around the country. They're doing this at Whiteman Air Force Base. They're doing this at Barksdale Air Force Base. Exposés are revealing all of that. Well, we're letting them fly all around Luke Air Force Base. Taxpayers are actually funding that. American pilots are training Chinese Communist Party pilots. And then at the end of the day, we're training pilots that they otherwise couldn't train in China to go into their military to one day potentially fight American pilots. We need to talk about how this is borderline treason to train the military that is geared towards killing our military.
You know, Michael, I would argue there's actually something even worse than what you just described, believe it or not. Let me tell you, there's concern that Western-trained surgeons as well return to China and then carry out the forced organ harvesting, live sometimes, of prisoners of conscience. How do we prevent this? Because, you know, institutions may actually be unintentionally enabling human rights atrocities in China.
Yeah, I've heard about this. I've actually heard about this in Arizona as well, but other states around the country, because states are passing legislation to prohibit health insurance plans from reimbursing for organ transplants that occur in China. But we need a lot more than that. The federal government needs to start sanctioning those entities in China and any individuals involved with those entities in China where we know the organ transplants, the forced organ transplants are occurring. Those are often associated with the Chinese military itself. These are often military hospitals that are carrying out these human rights abuses. So doctors who are coming through those hospitals should not be coming over to the United States at all. If you're associated with any of those institutions, you just shouldn't be allowed over here. I've personally just looked around in medical centers, some that have opposed the legislation, the state legislation I just described to you. There was a medical center in Arizona that opposed that legislation. They had somebody show up opposing that legislation. We looked on their website, they had doctors that trained in the Chinese military. So it's really absurd that the Chinese military is getting a vote in our democracy, is getting training in our flight schools, is getting to sap intelligence and expertise from our universities. They're compromising us and getting us all dirtied up in their ways while sapping our strength to build up their own strength.
So what is China's end game here? What's the broader strategy? You know, whether we're talking about leveraging student visas, research partnerships, exchange programs, what is it trying to do?
They build their strength off of our strength, and then they sow chaos, they sow poison in the United States. A couple easy examples. They obviously sow fentanyl in the United States. It's the number one cause of death of military-aged men in the United States. So they're intentionally killing American men of fighting age. They're the number one cause of that in the United States. So they're sowing chaos. They're sowing poison. They go onto our campuses. They're Chinese Communist Party agents who fund radicalism on campus, whether it's communist radicalism, Islamic radicalism. They'll sow any chaos that they can. But at the same time, they're tapping into the strengths of our society to pull the best parts out and bring it back to China, often by theft, but sometimes just by legitimate training. Whichever it is, no training, no value, no expertise should ever go from the United States to the Chinese military. Right now, it's happening in all kinds of ways. We need to cut it off in all those ways.
Okay, I'll just end with this. How do we cut it off? How do we stop it?
We need to get really serious about counterintelligence at both the state and the federal level. We shouldn't be allowing anyone into our universities, into our training programs that have any association with Chinese intelligence or military. So to start, the FAA should work with the DHS to just ban the training of foreign adversary nationals in our flight schools altogether. End that. The United States Air Force should say, we're not partnering with you if you're training the Chinese military. At the state level, we need to be cutting off research partnerships with all thousands of Chinese military entities are partnered with American universities for military research. That all needs to get cut off. So we need to get serious about counterintelligence and then executing against the knowledge of the infiltration of our society.
All right, Michael, great comments today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Don.
U.S. forces have seized another oil tanker linked to Venezuela in the Caribbean. This marks the 7th such seizure connected to sanctioned oil. The military said yesterday the oil tanker named Sagitta was in defiance of President Trump's quarantine of sanctioned vessels in the Caribbean and was taken out without incident. The Sagitta is a Liberian-flagged tanker, and its registration says it's owned and managed by a Hong Kong company. The tanker was sanctioned by the Treasury Department under an executive order related to Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. U.S. Southern Command said the seizure demonstrates its resolve to seize Venezuelan oil that leaves the country properly and lawfully. Legendary New York hot dog brand Nathan's Famous is going to have a new owner, and this new owner is a Chinese-owned company. Smithfield Foods has agreed to acquire the company for $450 million. Smithfield already had a hand in the business with an executive or exclusive license to manufacture, distribute, market, and sell products through retail. But that license was set to expire in 2032. The new deal will help Smithfield grow its packaged meats business. Worth noting, Smithfield Foods is headquartered in Virginia but is owned by WH Group, a Chinese food processing company based in Hong Kong. WH Group bought Smithfield in 2013 for about $4.7 billion. In connection with this case, lawmakers and regulators have raised concerns over foreign ownership in critical sectors such as food and agriculture. Now, some updates on peace-building efforts in Gaza. The Treasury Department says it has exposed and disrupted what it calls the covert support network of the Hamas terrorist group. In an announcement today, Treasury identifies several nonprofit organizations it says hide their affiliation with Hamas in order to raise funds from overseas donors. The Treasury lists 6 Gaza-based organizations that they say provide medical care to Palestinian civilians, but the department says they're actually subordinate to the military wing of Hamas. The action also targets the Popular Conference for Palestinians Abroad. That group says it broadly supports Palestinians, but Treasury says it's covertly controlled by Hamas. The Treasury is sanctioning these organizations and banning donations to them. One Treasury official said, quote, "The Trump administration will not look to the other way, while Hamas leadership and enablers exploit the financial system to fund terrorist operations." Joining us now to discuss the latest on the Greenland debate is Gerard Filitti, Senior Counsel at the Lawfare Project and political strategist. Gerard, thank you for joining us. So President Trump posting on Truth Social saying that he's formed the framework of a future deal respect to Greenland and, in fact, the entire Arctic region. And that was with NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte. Can you interpret this for us? What does this mean?
I think it tells us two things. First of all, that this is coming out of a meeting with the Secretary General of NATO, tells us that the primary interest here was and has been defense. It has been the strategic military interests of the United States. So what we can expect a future deal to look like would be the permission or the use of Greenland by the United States for military installations, especially for a missile shield to protect against ballistic missiles launched from Russia. The other thing that this tells us is that NATO and by extension the European Union do understand the threat that's posed by Russia and especially China, which is something that did come up in the discussions today.
Okay, Gerard, can I ask you about the question of ownership? Trump had questioned Denmark's historical right of ownership over the island, saying, quote, there are no written documents. It's only a boat that landed there hundreds of years ago. and that the U.S. also had boats landing there. What does it mean to have ownership? What does the right to ownership usually look like?
Well, first we have to look at the historical context. The area that's Greenland was explored by many different groups, many different cultures, but the territorial claim vested both in Denmark and at some point in Norway. We have to remember that Norway and Sweden were part of a kingdom, a larger kingdom, and that when these split off in the early 1800s, Greenland stayed with Denmark. Greenland remained a possession of Denmark, the same as the United States has, for example, Puerto Rico, which is not a state, but is nevertheless a territory. So this administration has continued since 1814, when there was a treaty by which Denmark ceded Norway to Sweden. And this was reinforced by international law by a settlement at the beginning of the 20th century. So what this means is that this is a self-autonomous, meaning that they govern themselves, but it's within a territory of Denmark. It belongs to Denmark.
So, you know, at the core of the situation is security, right? And Trump has stressed that Denmark has not done well to defend Greenland and that threats in the form of Russia and China are moving closer. What is the situation then with Russia and China? What are they doing there? And is it in coordination with each other?
Well, there are also two things to bear in mind here as well. That this is an issue that goes back, military use goes back to the Truman era, to the end of World War II, when the United States realized that we were in an arms race with the Soviet Union, what is now Russia, for missiles and technology to bomb one another. And most of the flight path of intercontinental ballistic missiles, of ICBMs, especially nuclear ones, would be over the North Pole. So Greenland would be a very strategic point, both to have a defense station to intercept whatever is being aimed at the United States and to monitor via satellite what's going on in Russia and now in China. So this has always been militarily strategically important. Now, what Russia and China have ambitions in the Arctic are trade routes. When you have a cheaper and faster way to ship products through territory that is now by the Greenland coast, it opens up a sea route as the Arctic ice is melting. You also have minerals, rare earth minerals, that are being exploited or that want to be exploited, especially by China. So China's interest has been to try to wedge themselves in like they have in other countries, to have investments to build infrastructure, but to have those rights to expropriate minerals and other valuable things that Greenland has to offer. So this is both a mineral deposit, it's strategically important for the military, and it's a trade route that Russia and China would use for shipping.
Okay, so you're saying that this is militarily important for the U.S. Trump has also said it's a point of security for the entire world as well, global security. So can you talk to us about the importance of Greenland in that context?
Well, in large part, it comes down to the fact that Greenland is uniquely situated. Where it's positioned at the Arctic Circle, the Arctic is really the last place in the world that has yet to be explored and exploited for its resources, for its oil. There's significant oil and gas reserves in the Arctic. So whoever has control of that area doesn't just have a good geographical position for war, but it has the ability to exploit economically and benefit from that. So this is really important to keep that in Western control, to keep that under American influence, so that it doesn't fall into the hands of China, so that it doesn't fall into the hands of Russia, and give those countries which have totalitarian communist system in China and even and we have Putin in Russia. We don't want them enriching themselves from Greenland at the expense of the rest of the world.
And quickly, Gerard, just one final question. Where do you stand on the administration's position that if the U.S. does not take Greenland through whatever means, that China and Russia will?
Well, I think we've seen President Trump back down from the position of by any means. I don't think we're going to see military force. We did have the announcement of the framework of a deal today that's going to be negotiated by Vice President Rubio, by Steve Witkoff, and by Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. I think that in the future, there is the possibility for conflict as resources dwindle, as countries look to exploit other resources in other locations. Greenland is an empty land. It's 60,000 people in a huge territory. So yeah, that would be the possibility of conflict in the future militarily for that territory, just like there is for other undeveloped or underdeveloped parts of the world.
Okay, Gerard, always great to speak with you. Thank you so much.
A pleasure. Thank you.
House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer is holding a press conference today on contempt of Congress actions involving former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Let's take a look.
Today, to hold the Clintons in contempt of Congress, and this shows that no one's above the law, and I'm just real proud of the committee and look forward to hopefully getting the Epstein documents in very quickly and trying to get answers for the American people. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman, do you think the Attorney General should be held in contempt because the Department of Justice has not produced all of the Epstein files it's supposed to?
It's my understanding the Attorney General is going to turn over all the documents once they're redacted. Now, we have seen the Attorney General comply with our subpoena. They have turned over documents, as I said numerous times today, and I've said numerous times on most of the networks that are here today. We would like for the pace to pick up. We want to get the documents. We're not going to let her off the hook. But from a legal standpoint, she is complying with the law, and we expect to get the documents very soon.
In addition to your subpoena, though, are you concerned that she has not complied with the law?
No, with my subpoena, she's complied. She's turning over documents. Again,
but also the Epstein Files Transparency
Well, the Epstein Files Transparency Act is a Judiciary Committee thing. They put a date on it. She's going to be in front of the Judiciary Committee in 2 weeks. And I think that's the important thing with what the Democrats were trying to say today about Bondi. And look, no one on our side is defending Bondi. Let me be very clear. No one on our side is defending Bondi. But we have to recognize there are a lot of documents. They produced documents, I think, on 2 different document drops. The first one, the Democrats complained there were not enough redactions. In the second drop, they complained there were too many redactions. So ever how many pages, we've heard numbers range from several 100,000 to several million pages of document. That's a lot of eyes that are going to have to be over it and review it to try to make the redactions, because the victims have made it clear to us that they want anything pertaining to their privacy redacted. And that's the impression I'm under that the Department of Justice is trying to do.
Mr. Chairman, is it important, is there still an opportunity for the Clintons to negotiate some sort of satisfaction of the subpoena, even though you've taken this step with contempt?
There's always an opportunity. It's going to be 2 weeks before this is on the floor. We're going to have to notice this is going to be treated like any other bill. We're making sure every I is dotted and every T is crossed, because they have a very expensive legal team. So obviously there are going to be a couple of more days this week, depending on the weather. Then there'll be 3 days notice, and then we can vote on it. I've been assured we're going to vote on it. So that's 2 weeks, because we're going to be off a week. They're going to have 2 weeks that they're going to theoretically be able to negotiate. But one thing that I want to make very clear, a lot of what the Democrats were saying today, and I'm not accusing the Democrats on the committee of lying. I'm accusing the lawyers for the Clintons of not being truthful. They were not in good faith negotiating. They never made a proposal where there would be an actual transcript. And I don't think anyone in the media would accept any type of interview without a transcript. Then you're going to have notes, and it's going to be Clinton's word against my word, Garcia's word against my word. That's no good. There should be a recorded, at the very least, transcript, if not audio and video. I would argue all 3 of the deposition. That is the law. That is what is considered legal in court. And I don't think anyone in the media would argue against that. So, yes.